The old bus creaked to a stop at the corner of 5th and Pine, its doors folding open with a hiss that matched the knot in Alex's stomach. This was it, Westbrook Conservatory, the place where dreams either soared or crashed. Alex clutched the worn violin case closer, feeling the familiar scratches under his fingertips. 6 years of saving tips from the diner, of practicing until his neighbors banged on the thin apartment walls, of YouTube tutorials instead of proper lessons, all for this moment. The building loomed ahead, all glass and sharp angles that screamed, "You don't belong here." Students flowed in and out, carrying instrument cases that didn't have duct tape holding them together. Alex checked his watch 30 minutes early. Better early than never, his grandmother always said. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and money. A sleek reception desk stood guarded by a woman with glasses that probably cost more than Alex's rent. "Hi," Alex said, voice cracking slightly. "I'm here for the special admission audition with Director Blackwood." The receptionist's eyebrows lifted just enough to suggest surprise. "You're the special consideration candidate?" Alex nodded, knowing what she was really asking. How did someone like you get an audition slot with Jonathan Blackwood? The truth was simple but sounded like a fairy tale. A visiting music teacher had heard Alex playing in the park one evening and had made some calls. Alex hadn't believed it either until the official email arrived. "Down the hall, last door on the right. They're running ahead of schedule, so they might take you early." Alex's heart thumped painfully. Early? The plan had been to use those 30 minutes to warm up, to calm down, to prepare. Now there was only the long walk down the hallway, each step on the polished floor echoing like a countdown. Outside the audition room, Alex heard the final notes of someone else's audition. Flawless, confident, everything an audition should be. Then murmured voices, a door opening, and a girl with perfect posture and an expensive-looking cello case emerged. She didn't even glance at Alex waiting in the hall. "Next," called a sharp voice from inside. This was it. No turning back. Alex took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped into the room. The audition space was smaller than expected but felt massive with its high ceiling and the 3 people sitting at a table in the center. 2 women were talking quietly, but the man in the middle commanded all the attention. Director Jonathan Blackwood, legendary, ruthless, and known for making even accomplished musicians break down in tears. He didn't look up as Alex entered, just continued writing something on the form in front of him. "Name?" he asked, still not looking up. "Alex Lee," came the reply, followed by a swallow so loud it seemed to echo off the walls. "Peace?" Blackwood finally glanced up, his sharp eyes taking in everything from the scuffed shoes to the second-hand dress shirt Alex had ironed 3 times that morning. Bach's Violin Sonata No. 1 in G minor. It had taken 4 months of practice, working through each passage until the neighbors threatened to call the landlord. Blackwood sighed as if already disappointed. "Very well. You may begin when ready." Alex set down the case and opened it carefully, revealing the violin inside. It wasn't much to look at. A thrift store find that a local repair shop had helped restore as much as possible. But it made music, real music when treated right. After a quick tuning that felt like it took hours under Blackwood's impatient stare, Alex positioned the violin under his chin, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes came out shakier than they had during practice. The room's acoustics were different from the tiny apartment bathroom where Alex usually practiced for the best sound. The weight of 3 pairs of eyes made the bow feel heavier somehow. Blackwood's pen tapped against the table. Once, twice, 3 times. Each tap felt like a hammer on Alex's concentration. Just as the piece was building, just as Alex was finding a rhythm and the nerves were starting to fade, Blackwood's hand shot up. "Stop, stop, stop." The music cut off abruptly, leaving a silence that pressed against Alex's ears. "You call that playing?" Blackwood's voice wasn't loud, but it cut deep. He turned to one of the women beside him. "Patricia, remind me why we're doing these special consideration auditions again. I could be having lunch right now." Patricia's eyes flicked to Alex with something like sympathy before she murmured something to Blackwood that Alex couldn't hear. Heat rushed to Alex's face. The room suddenly felt too hot, too small, too everything. This had been a mistake. 6 years of dreaming for what? To be dismissed in less than 30 seconds? "Look," Blackwood said, turning back to Alex. "Bach requires precision, technical skill, understanding. You're playing the notes, some of them anyway, but there's no mastery here. No feeling. He gestured vaguely toward the door. Thank you for coming in, but wait. The word escaped before Alex could stop it. Please just one more minute. Blackwood's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. Nobody interrupted Jonathan Blackwood. Everyone knew that, excuse me. 1 minute, Alex repeated, heart thundering. A different piece, please. The two women exchanged glances. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, a strange expression crossing his face, annoyance mixed with something else. Curiosity, maybe? 30 seconds, he said finally. Not a second more. Impress me or don't waste my time. Alex nodded, mind racing. Bach wouldn't work. Not now, not with hands that were trembling too hard to manage the technical passages. But there was something else, something that might work. The piece no one had ever heard before. The one Alex played alone at night, when the world was quiet and the violin became a voice for things too complicated for words. Closing his eyes, Alex lifted the violin again and began to play. This time the notes didn't shake. They soared, starting softly, almost a whisper, building into something that filled the room, not with perfect technical precision, but with raw honesty. It was the sound of bus rides home after double shifts, of rejection letters from scholarship programs, of playing in the park as the sun set, because the apartment was too depressing to return to. But it was also the sound of stubborn hope, of fingers that kept finding their way back to the strings, no matter how many times they were told to do something more practical. Alex didn't see Blackwood's pen drop to the floor. Didn't notice Patricia lean forward in her chair, or the third judge reach for her phone to record. The music had taken over completely, flowing through the cheap violin and making it sing like an instrument worth 10 times its value. When the final note faded, Alex opened his eyes, suddenly aware of the complete silence in the room. No pen tapping, no whispering, nothing. Blackwood was staring with an expression Alex couldn't read. His mouth had fallen slightly open and he seemed to have forgotten to close it. What was that? He asked finally, his voice entirely different than before. Softer, almost reverent. Just something I wrote, Alex admitted, lowering the violin. It doesn't have a name yet. You wrote that? The third judge spoke for the first time, her phone still held up. That's original? Alex nodded, suddenly self-conscious. It's probably not technically correct, I know. I don't have proper composition training. Where did you study? Blackwood interrupted, leaning forward. I didn't, not formally. The admission hung in the air. I learned from YouTube tutorials and free community workshops. And a lot of practice. Blackwood stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a terrible moment, Alex thought he was going to ask for the performance to be erased, to pretend it never happened because it broke too many rules of classical music. Instead, Blackwood walked around the table and approached slowly, as if in a trance. He stopped a few feet away, studying Alex with new eyes. Play it again, he said quietly. The whole thing this time. The whole thing? But it's almost 10 minutes long when I play all of it. All of it, Blackwood repeated. And then we're going to talk about why you're not playing Bach for your audition when you clearly have something much more interesting to offer the world. As Alex lifted the violin once more, a strange feeling replaced the knot of anxiety from earlier. It wasn't confidence exactly, more like the calm that comes when there's nothing left to lose. The worst had already happened, and somehow it had turned into something else entirely. The music began again, telling a story without words. And this time, when Alex dared to glance at Blackwood's face during a brief pause, there was no scoffing, no dismissal. Instead, there was the wide-eyed look of someone whose world had just been turned upside down in the most unexpected way. 30 seconds had turned into 10 minutes, and those 10 minutes were about to change everything. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed Alex's performance. No one moved. It was as if the music had cast a spell over the room, freezing everyone in place. Alex lowered the violin slowly, suddenly aware of how sweaty his palms had become, how his heart pounded against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Director Blackwood cleared his throat. Once, twice, he seemed to be struggling to find words, which, according to every rumor about the man, had never happened before in his 30-year career. Where did that come from? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alex shifted uncomfortably under his intense gaze. I just play what I feel sometimes. What you feel? Blackwood repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language he was trying to understand. He turned to his colleagues. Did you hear what I just heard? Patricia, the woman to his right, nodded, a smile breaking across her face. Absolutely extraordinary. The third judge was still holding her phone, the recording light blinking. Raw talent like this comes along maybe once in a decade, she said. Blackwood turned back to Alex, studying him with new eyes. You've never had formal training? Alex shook his head. Couldn't afford it. I watched videos online, practiced whenever I could. My neighbor downstairs hates me. A nervous laugh escaped. She bangs on her ceiling with a broom handle when I play too late. Instead of the dismissive snort Alex expected, Blackwood's face softened slightly. And the violin? Thrift store find. Our repair shop downtown fixed it up enough to play. It's not much, but it's not the instrument, Blackwood interrupted. It's the musician. He gestured to a chair. Sit down, please, Alex sat, still clutching the violin, afraid that if he put it down, the spell would break and Blackwood would remember he was supposed to be scoffing, not asking questions. That piece you played, your composition, it breaks about a dozen classical rules. Blackwood leaned forward. And yet it works. More than works. He seemed to struggle again for the right word. It's alive. The third judge finally lowered her phone. Alex, I'm Riley Chen, head of the strings department. What Director Blackwood is trying to say in his own way is that we'd like to offer you a spot at Westbrook. The words didn't make sense at first. They floated in the air like soap bubbles, beautiful but surely about to pop and disappear. A spot? You mean admitted? To study here? Alex's voice sounded strange to his own ears. Not just admitted, Blackwood said, seeming to have found his footing again. We want to offer you a scholarship. Full tuition. The room spun slightly. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like Alex. People from the wrong side of town with second-hand instruments and no connections. There must be some mistake, Alex said, the words tumbling out. I failed the Bach. You said I was playing it wrong. You were, Blackwood said bluntly. Your technique needs considerable work. Your posture is atrocious. Your fingering on the scales was creative at best. Wrong at worst. Patricia shot him a warning look. But he continued. But that piece you played, your piece, had something no amount of technical training can teach. Soul. Authenticity. He leaned back in his chair. Technique can be taught. What you have can't. Alex's hands trembled slightly. I don't understand. 30 minutes ago, I was nobody, just another kid with a dream too big for their background. 30 minutes ago, I hadn't heard you play, Blackwood corrected. That's the difference. Riley Chen tapped something into her tablet. We'll need to fast-track your paperwork. Term starts in 3 weeks, and we'll want to place you with the right instructors. Your composition instructor will be particularly important, given your natural talent there. It was happening too fast. Alex's mind raced to catch up. Wait, my job. My apartment. I can't just... Housing is included in the scholarship, Patricia explained gently. As for work, we have work-study programs on campus. Many students teach beginner lessons to community members. I can't teach. I don't even know what I'm doing half the time, Alex protested. Blackwood actually laughed at that, a short, surprised sound. You know more than you think. But yes, we'll need to fill in the considerable gaps in your formal education. He stood suddenly. Come with me. Alex hesitated, then carefully placed the violin back in its case and followed Blackwood out of the audition room. They walked in silence down corridors that grew increasingly busy with students rushing between classes. Many nodded respectfully to Blackwood, their eyes curious as they took in Alex's worn jeans and obviously non-designer shirt, walking alongside the director. They stopped at a large door with a plaque reading, Performance Hall A. Listen, Blackwood said, pushing the door open to reveal an enormous concert hall with rows of empty seats facing a stage. What do you hear? Alex listened. Nothing. It's empty, exactly. But in 2 months, we have our fall showcase. This room will be filled with music critics, donors, industry professionals. He turned to face Alex directly. And you will be playing your composition on that stage. The blood drained from Alex's face. What? No, I'm not ready for something like that. I've never performed for more than a handful of people in the park. You're right, you're not ready, Blackwood agreed. Not yet. But you will be because I'm going to work with you personally to get you there. You? But why would you do that? Blackwood's expression turned serious. Because in 30 years of teaching, I've learned to recognize when I'm witnessing something rare. Something that could change not just a career, but potentially an art form. He gestured around the empty hall. I want to be able to say I was part of that, even if just as a guide. They left the hall and continued walking until they reached an office with Blackwood's name on the door. Inside, he pulled a folder from a drawer and handed it to Alex. Scholarship paperwork. Take it home, read it carefully, sign it, bring it back tomorrow. He scribbled something on a sticky note and pressed it to the folder. My personal number. Call if you have questions. Alex took the folder numbly. This is really happening? It's really happening, Blackwood confirmed. But understand something. This won't be easy. In fact, it will likely be the hardest thing you've ever done. I'm not known for being gentle. I heard you made a cellist cry last semester. 3 cellists. Blackwood corrected without a hint of remorse. And a violist. But that's because I pushed them to be better than they thought they could be. He studied Alex with those piercing eyes. Are you willing to be pushed? Really pushed? Because what I heard in that audition room was just the beginning. Alex thought about the tiny apartment, about the endless shifts at the diner, about all the nights spent watching violin tutorials online, while others went out and enjoyed their youth, about the dream that had seemed so impossible just hours ago. Yes, Alex said, with a certainty that felt new and exhilarating. Push as hard as you need to. A smile, the first real one, crossed Blackwood's face. Good answer. Now there's someone else you should meet. He led the way down another corridor to a small practice room where a young man was working through a difficult piano piece. Blackwood knocked on the open door. Ryu, got a minute? The pianist stopped playing and looked up. Director Blackwood, of course. His eyes moved curiously to Alex. This is Alex Lee, our newest scholarship student. Alex, this is Ryu, one of our most promising pianists. I think your composition would benefit from a piano accompaniment for the showcase, and Ryu here is the best we have. Ryu stood and offered his hand. Nice to meet you. What's your piece? It's, original, Alex said, still unused to the idea of someone else playing his music. Original composition? Impressive. I'd love to hear it. You will, Blackwood said. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., my studio. Alex will play, I'll record, and you'll start working out the accompaniment. The rest of the tour passed in a blur of introductions, information, and increasingly overwhelming details. By the time Alex left Westbrook that afternoon, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the campus. On the bus ride home, Alex stared out the window, the events of the day playing on repeat, from the crushing disappointment of Blackwood's initial scoff to the impossible turn of events that followed. The scholarship folder felt heavy on Alex's lap, the future suddenly wide open in ways that hadn't seemed possible that morning. The bus passed the diner where Alex had worked double shifts for years. Through the window, familiar faces moved about, unaware that their co-worker's life had just changed completely. Alex pulled out the phone and dialed with shaking fingers. Grandma, you're not going to believe what just happened. As Alex recounted the day's events, the voice on the other end grew increasingly emotional. I always knew, she kept saying. From the first time you picked up that toy violin as a child, I always knew. I'm scared, Alex admitted quietly, watching the familiar neighborhood approach through the bus window. What if I can't do this? What if I get there and they realize I don't belong? Listen to me, the warm voice said firmly. You belong anywhere your heart and talent take you. Your grandfather would be so proud if he could see this day. Alex thought of the old man who had first put a record player in the living room, who had played old vinyl records of classical masterpieces while telling stories of concerts he'd once attended in his youth. Tomorrow, Alex said, watching as the bus approached the stop near the rundown apartment building, everything changes. The old bus creaked to a stop at the corner just as it had that morning. But the person who stepped off was not quite the same as the one who had boarded with a nod of anxiety and a worn violin case. Something had shifted. A door had opened that could never be closed again. Alex walked toward the apartment building with lighter steps. The violin case held a little higher, a little prouder. Somewhere in the distance, a car honked, a dog barked. Life went on as usual. But for Alex, the ordinary world had transformed into something extraordinary, all because someone had finally truly listened. The morning sun streamed through the window of Alex's new dorm room, casting golden light across unfamiliar furniture. 2 weeks had passed since the audition that changed everything. 2 weeks of paperwork, goodbyes, and tearful hugs from his grandmother who insisted this was what your grandfather would have wanted. 2 weeks of packing up a life that fit into just 3 boxes and a backpack. Alex sat on the edge of the bed, violin case open beside him, staring at the schedule that had arrived yesterday. Today was the first official day as a Westbrook student, and the knot in his stomach felt heavier than ever. A knock on the door made him jump. "You decent in there," a voice called out. It was Ryu, the pianist he'd met briefly during the tour. "Yeah." "Come in," Alex called back, quickly closing the violin case. Ryu pushed the door open, already dressed in what seemed to be the unofficial Westbrook uniform, dark jeans, button-up shirt, and a light jacket that probably cost more than all of Alex's clothes combined. "Thought you might want a friendly face on your first day," Ryu said, leaning against the doorframe. "First days are the worst. I threw up before my first class here." Alex laughed, despite the nerves. "Thanks for the encouraging words. Just keeping it real." Ryu nodded toward the schedule on the bed. "What's your first class?" "Music theory with Professor Winters." Ryu winced. "Tough start. Winters is brilliant, but intense. Never smiles before noon. Some say never smiles at all." He checked his watch. "We better get moving if you want to grab coffee before class. Trust me, you'll need it." The campus buzzed with activity as they made their way to the coffee shop. Students hurried in all directions, instrument cases strapped to backs or rolled alongside them. Alex tried not to stare at the gleaming violins and cellos, so different from his own weathered case. "Everyone looks like they belong here," Alex murmured, accepting the coffee Ryu handed over. "Everyone's faking it," Ryu replied with a shrug. "First rule of music school. We're all terrified all the time. Some just hide it better than others." They rounded a corner and nearly collided with Director Blackwood, who was deep in conversation with another faculty member. He paused mid-sentence when he saw Alex. "Ah, Mr. Lee, first day." It wasn't a question. His eyes flicked to the violin case. "I expect to see you in my studio at 4 p.m. Don't be late." Before Alex could respond, Blackwood continued down the hallway, his conversation resuming without missing a beat. "Does he memorize everyone's schedules?" Alex asked, watching him disappear around a corner. "Just the ones he's interested in," Ryu said with a meaningful look. "And Blackwood doesn't get interested in just anyone." The theory classroom was already half full when they arrived. Alex slid into an empty seat, acutely aware of curious glances from other students. Word had spread about the scholarship student with no formal training, who'd somehow impressed Blackwood enough to earn a spot in the prestigious school. Professor Winters swept in exactly on time. A tall woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Without preamble, she launched into a lecture that had Alex's head spinning within minutes. Terms like harmonic progression and chromatic modulation flew past while he scrambled to take notes, increasingly aware of the vast gaps in his musical education. When Winters suddenly called on him to explain the difference between natural and harmonic minor scales, Alex froze. The silence stretched uncomfortably. A few students exchanged glances. "Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate on your instrument instead," Winters suggested, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp, heat rising in his cheeks. Alex took out his violin and played what he thought was a minor scale, the way he'd figured it out by ear years ago. Winters listened, head tilted slightly. "That's interesting. Technically incorrect in classical terms, but interesting. You've been playing by ear alone?" Alex nodded, wishing the floor would open up and swallow him whole. She turned to another student. "Bennett, please demonstrate the proper harmonic minor scale." A boy with perfectly styled hair lifted his violin and played a flawless scale that made Alex's attempt sound like a child's experiment. "Thank you." Winters turned back to Alex. "See me after class?" "Mr. Lee." The remainder of the class passed in a blur of humiliation. When the bell finally rang, Alex approached Winters' desk with dread pooling in his stomach. "Sir, down," she said, gesturing to a chair while she sorted through some papers. "I'm sorry about the scale," Alex began. "I know I have a lot to catch up on." "Stop apologizing," she interrupted, looking up. "I've spoken with Director Blackwood about your unusual situation." Here it comes, Alex thought. She's going to tell me I don't belong here. Instead, she pulled out a thick binder and slid it across the desk. "This is a customized theory workbook. Start from the beginning. 1 chapter each night. We'll meet twice a week before class to review your progress. Alex stared at the binder. You're giving me extra help? I'm giving you the foundation you should have had years ago. Her expression softened slightly. Talent without technique is like having wings but not knowing how to fly. Thank you, Alex said, genuinely moved. I'll work hard, I promise. I know you will. She turned back to her papers. Don't be late for your next class. The rest of the day passed in a similar fashion, moments of crushing inadequacy followed by unexpected kindness. A composition professor who praised his unconventional approach while gently correcting his notation. A performance coach who said his stance was creative but ultimately painful and showed him a better way to hold the violin. By the time 4 p.m. rolled around, Alex was mentally exhausted but determined not to show it as he knocked on Blackwood's studio door. Enter, came the familiar voice. The studio was smaller than Alex expected, a piano in one corner, sound equipment along one wall, and large windows overlooking the campus grounds. Blackwood sat at a desk marking papers with a red pen. Right on time. Good. He set down his pen. Play your piece, no greeting, no warm-up, no easing in. Just the command. Alex had learned enough about Blackwood by now to know this was his way. Removing the violin from its case, Alex positioned it under his chin, using the new stance he'd learned earlier, and began to play. The music came more easily here than it had in the audition room. Something about Blackwood's focused attention made Alex want to prove himself, to show that the decision to admit him hadn't been a mistake. When he finished, Blackwood didn't speak immediately. He walked to the sound equipment, pressed a few buttons, and played back a recording. Listen, he instructed. It was Alex's audition performance from 2 weeks ago. Hearing it through professional equipment revealed both its raw beauty and its technical flaws. Now listen to what you just played, Blackwood said, playing the new recording. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. The same emotion was there, but some of the rougher edges had been smoothed out. The new positioning had improved the sound quality. The notes were cleaner. 2 weeks, Blackwood said quietly. That's what 2 weeks of proper instruction has already done. He turned to face Alex directly. But something's missing in today's performance, Alex frowned. Missing? The desperation. Blackwood's eyes were intense. In your audition, you played like someone who had nothing to lose. Because in that moment, you didn't. Today, you played like someone trying not to lose what they've gained. The observation hit with uncomfortable accuracy. I'm afraid, Alex admitted. Afraid I don't deserve to be here. Afraid I'll fail. Good. Good. Fear can be useful. It keeps you honest. Blackwood sat down at the piano and played a few chords. But don't let it make you safe. Safe is boring. Safe is what everyone else does. His fingers moved across the keys, finding the melody of Alex's composition and adding harmonies that made it sound richer, fuller. Your music isn't safe. That's what makes it worth developing. For the next hour, they worked on expanding the original piece. Blackwood pushing for more in some sections, stripping away notes in others, challenging Alex to think beyond what felt comfortable. Rue will join us tomorrow, Blackwood said as their session wound down. We'll start working on the piano accompaniment. About the showcase, Alex ventured hesitantly. Are you sure I'll be ready in time? It's only 6 weeks away. Blackwood closed the piano lid. No, I'm not sure. That's what makes it interesting. He gathered his notes. One more thing before you go. What are you calling this piece? Alex hadn't thought about a title. I don't know. It doesn't have a name. It needs one. Every story needs a name. Blackwood handed Alex a folder. Inside are the technical exercises I expect you to master before our next session. 3 hours of practice minimum each day. 3 hours. On top of classes and theory homework? Welcome to Westbrook. Blackwood's smile held no sympathy. If you want extraordinary results, you put in extraordinary effort. As Alex left the studio, the weight of everything hit all at once. The expectations. The work ahead. The chance he might still fail spectacularly. His phone buzzed with a text from his grandmother, asking how the first day had gone. Standing in the hallway of a school he'd only dreamed of attending just weeks ago, Alex wasn't sure how to answer. It had been overwhelming, humbling, terrifying, and somehow exactly where he needed to be. He typed back, hard but good. Learning so much. Miss you. Tucking the phone away, Alex headed toward the practice rooms. 3 hours of exercises wouldn't complete themselves, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for the first time, those challenges felt like steps forward rather than obstacles to overcome. The music in his head was changing, growing, becoming something he couldn't have imagined when playing alone in his tiny apartment. Somewhere between Blackwood's demanding standards and his own raw talent, something new was taking shape. All it needed now was a name. 3 weeks into the semester, and Westbrook was beginning to feel less like a foreign country and more like a challenging new home. Alex had settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible a month ago. Up at 6 for personal practice, classes until mid-afternoon, theory catch-up sessions with Professor Winters 3 times a week, and at least 2 hours in Blackwood's studio every day, working on the showcase piece. The dormitory practice room stayed lit until midnight most evenings, and Alex had become a familiar fixture, often the last to leave. Other students had started to nod in recognition in the hallways. A few had even asked about that piece they'd heard through the practice room door. On this particular evening, Alex sat across from Ryu in the campus coffee shop, both of them hunched over the latest version of the composition. "It's coming together," Ryu said, tapping a section where his piano part intertwined with the violin melody. "This transition here, it's unlike anything I've played before. Sort of breaks all the rules but still works somehow." Alex sipped at a now-cold coffee. Blackwood says that's the whole point. Breaking rules on purpose is different from breaking them because you don't know them. "And are you breaking them on purpose now?" Ryu asked with a grin. "About 60% on purpose, 40% still figuring it out," Alex admitted, returning the smile. They'd become something like friends over the past weeks. Ryu, despite coming from a musical family with connections throughout the classical world, never made Alex feel lesser for having none of that background. If anything, he seemed fascinated by Alex's self-taught approach. "Listen," Ryu said, closing his folder. "There's a small concert happening off campus tonight. Some graduate students playing at this little jazz bar downtown. Want to come? You've been working nonstop. A break would do you good." Alex hesitated. The stack of theory homework wasn't getting any smaller, and there were still passages in the showcase piece that needed work. "Come on," Ryu pressed. "All work and no play makes for boring music. Besides, you barely leave campus. There's a whole city out there." "All right," Alex relented, "but just for a couple hours." The jazz bar was a world away from Westbrook's polished practice rooms and performance halls. Dim lighting, mismatched furniture, and walls covered in old vinyl records and vintage instruments. A small stage held a quartet, piano, bass, drums, and a violinist who was playing in a style Alex had never seen before. "Jazz violin," Ryu explained, noting Alex's interest as they found a small table near the back. Different technique entirely from classical. The violinist seemed to be making up the music on the spot, responding to the piano player's cues, building something collaborative and spontaneous. It was messy and imperfect and utterly alive. "They're improvising," Alex said in wonder. "All of it?" "Most of it. They have a structure they follow, but within that, they're free to create in the moment." Ryu ordered drinks for them both. "That's Wei on violin. She's a 3rd year at Westbrook, classical training. But this is her real passion." Alex watched, transfixed as Wei's bow danced across the strings, producing sounds that would make Professor Winters wince, but that fit perfectly in this space. With this music, when the set ended, Ryu waved Wei over to their table. "Ryu, didn't expect to see you here tonight." She set her violin case down and pulled up a chair. Her eyes turned curiously to Alex. "Wait, aren't you the scholarship student everyone's talking about? The one Blackwood's mentoring for the showcase?" Alex shifted uncomfortably. "Word gets around, I guess. It's Westbrook. Gossip travels faster than 16th notes." Wei grinned. "So? How is it working with the great and terrible Blackwood?" "Challenging, exhausting, amazing." Alex paused. "He pushes hard." "That's his way of showing he believes in you," Wei said. "I had a master class with him last year. Tore my playing to shreds in front of everyone. Then spent 3 hours helping me rebuild it afterward. Totally changed my classical technique." She nodded toward the stage where her bandmates were packing up. "But this is where I get to break all those perfect rules on purpose." Something clicked in Alex's mind. "That's what's missing." "What's missing?" Ryu asked, in my piece. "It's too controlled now. Blackwood's been helping me refine it, but I'm losing the freedom that made it work in the first place." Alex pulled out a napkin and began scribbling notes. I need to keep the structure but leave room for this. Wei looked over at the napkin. Improvisational sections within a classical framework. That's ambitious. Isn't that what Blackwood's been pushing for? Something new? Alex looked up, suddenly energized. Would you listen to what we have so far? Give feedback from a jazz perspective? Before Wei could answer, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Blackwood, which was unusual enough to be concerning. Studio. Now, bring the latest version. Alex showed the message to Ryu, who raised his eyebrows. Blackwood never texts, and it's almost 10 p.m. I have to go. Alex gathered the scattered music sheets. Wei, maybe another time? Count on it. This sounds interesting. She picked up her violin case. Good luck with whatever that's about. The campus was quiet as Alex hurried back, the napkin with the new ideas safely tucked into a pocket. The lights were on in Blackwood's studio, spilling out into the dark hallway. Alex knocked once and entered to find Blackwood standing by the window, looking out at the night sky, a cup of coffee in his hand. Sir, is everything okay? Blackwood turned, his expression unreadable. Riley Chen from the admissions panel, you remember her? Alex nodded. The one who recorded my audition. She shared that recording with a friend at the National Symphony Orchestra. They're looking for pieces for their New Voices series next spring. He set down his coffee cup. They want to hear the completed version of your composition, for possible inclusion. The words didn't register at first. The National... Wait, they want my piece? If it's good enough. If we finish it in time. Blackwood's usual stern expression gave way to something almost like excitement. This could be a significant opportunity, Alex. Beyond the showcase. Beyond Westbrook. Alex sank into a chair, thoughts racing. But it's not ready. It's not even named yet. And I was just thinking tonight that something's missing. What's missing? Blackwood asked sharply. Hesitantly, Alex pulled out the napkin. I was at a jazz performance off campus and I realized, I think we need improvisational sections, places where the music can breathe differently each time it's played. Blackwood took the napkin, studying the scribbled notes with intense focus. For a long moment he said nothing, and Alex prepared for rejection of the idea instead. He walked to the piano and began playing one of the main themes from the piece, but looser, with subtle variations, letting the melody wander before bringing it back to the written line. Like this? He asked, not looking up from the keys. Yes, exactly like that. Alex pulled out the violin. And then here I could respond differently each time, based on how you play it. For the next 2 hours they experimented, breaking apart sections of the carefully structured piece and putting them back together with spaces for freedom. Blackwood recorded everything, occasionally making notes, his usual critiques replaced by thoughtful suggestions. This changes the nature of the piece, he said finally, as the clock approached midnight. It won't be just a composition anymore. It will be a framework for musical conversation between performers. Is that okay? For the showcase? For the symphony submission? Blackwood actually smiled, a rare sight that transformed his usually stern face. It's better than okay. It's exactly what they're looking for. Something traditional enough to be accessible, but innovative enough to be exciting. He began gathering the scattered notes. We need to get this on paper properly, and we need to expand the instrumentation. Expand. For the symphony, we'd need to arrange it for their full orchestra. But even for the showcase, I'm thinking beyond just violin and piano now. He was practically pacing with energy. Cello for sure. Perhaps clarinet. We need to bring in some other students. Alex's head was spinning. In the space of a few hours, the project had grown from a showcase piece to something much bigger. Exciting, yes, but also terrifying. What if I can't deliver? The question slipped out before Alex could stop it. What if it's not good enough? Blackwood stopped his excited planning and looked directly at Alex. 3 weeks ago, you couldn't properly play a harmonic minor scale. Now you're writing music that has the National Symphony interested. His voice became quieter, more serious. Whether or not this particular piece gets accepted, you've already proven something important. What's that? That talent can come from anywhere. That music doesn't belong only to those with the right background or training or connections. He tapped the napkin with the jazz-inspired notes, and that sometimes the most interesting ideas come from outside the system. As Alex packed up the violin, a strange calm settled over the earlier excitement. Whatever happened next, whether success or failure, Things had already changed in ways that couldn't be reversed. There was no going back to the person who had boarded that bus with a second-hand violin and desperate hope. "We need a name," Blackwood said as Alex reached the door. "The piece needs a title before we share it more widely." Alex paused, thinking of the journey from that first scoffing remark to this moment of possibility. How about breaking through? Blackwood considered it, then nodded slowly. Simple, direct, it works. He picked up his coffee cup. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start the next phase." Walking back to the dormitory under a sky full of stars, Alex felt the weight of both opportunity and challenge. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential for both spectacular success and public failure. But for the first time, the fear felt like fuel rather than a weight. Whatever happened next, the music was finding its true voice, and so was Alex. The night of the showcase arrived with a flurry of autumn leaves and a buzz of anticipation that filled the Westbrook campus. Performance Hall A, which had seemed so intimidatingly empty 2 months ago, now hummed with activity as staff arranged chairs and tested lighting. Outside, a line had begun to form despite the chilly evening air. Not just the usual parents and faculty, but critics from local papers and even a representative from the National Symphony Orchestra. Backstage, Alex paced in a small practice room, violin in hand, running through the trickiest passages of Breaking Through one last time. The piece had evolved dramatically over the past month, growing from a solo violin with piano accompaniment to a chamber ensemble that included Ryu on piano, Wei on second violin, and 2 other students on cello and clarinet. A knock on the door interrupted the practice. It was Ryu, already dressed in concert black, looking both nervous and excited. "How's it going in here? The others are warming up in the green room." "Just working on the transition before the improvisation section," Alex said, lowering the violin. Still worried about how it'll sound with everyone. The truth was, they hadn't had as much time to rehearse together as Alex would have liked. Between classes, individual practice, and the constant refinements to the score, the 5 of them had managed only a handful of full run-throughs. The improvisational sections, which had seemed so inspired the night at the jazz bar, now loomed as potential disasters if the chemistry wasn't right on stage. "It'll be fine," Ryu said, though his voice betrayed his own nerves. "We've got 10 minutes before we need to line up." "Blackwood's looking for you." Alex nodded and carefully placed the violin back in its case. No longer the weathered one from the audition, but a loaner from the school's collection that better matched the growing demands of the music. Another reminder of how much had changed in such a short time. Blackwood was waiting in the hallway, clipboard in hand, looking unusually formal in a dark suit. His eyes darted up as Alex approached. "There you are. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Alex admitted. "What if I freeze up there? What if the improv sections fall apart? Then you'll recover and keep going," Blackwood said matter-of-factly. "Remember what we discussed. If something goes wrong, don't panic, don't apologize, just find your way back to the music." He handed over a program. "You're closing the first half. The hall is nearly full already." Alex glanced at the program, seeing Breaking Through printed there among works by Bach, Vivaldi, and other student compositions. It looked so official, so legitimate. "I never thanked you," Alex said suddenly. "For what?" "For scoffing that day. For saying you call that playing? If you hadn't, I might not have played my own piece. None of this would have happened." Blackwood's perpetually serious expression softened slightly. "I wasn't wrong, you know. Your Bach was terrible." A rare smile crossed his face. "But I would have been very wrong to let you walk out of that room without discovering what else you could do." A stagehand appeared at the end of the hall. "5 minutes to places, please." "I should join the others," Alex said, suddenly aware of the time. "One more thing." Blackwood reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "This came for you today. I thought you might want to open it before you go on." Alex took the envelope, heavy paper with the Westbrook seal in the corner. Inside was a single card with official letterhead. "The Westbrook Conservatory is pleased to award Alex Lee the Theodore Palmer Award for Innovation in Composition, with accompanying scholarship for the remainder of undergraduate studies." The words blurred as Alex's eyes filled with unexpected tears. The scholarship that had seemed so miraculous 2 months ago only covered the first year. The question of how to pay for the remaining 3 years had been pushing its way into late-night worries. I don't understand. The faculty votes on it each semester. It was unanimous." Blackwood tucked the envelope back into Alex's hand. Whatever happens tonight, your place here is secure. Now go make music. The green room was a buzz of nervous energy as the ensemble made final preparations. Wei was helping the cellist, Lin, adjust her bow grip while Ryu ran silent scales on his knees. The clarinet player, Theo, was breathing deeply with closed eyes. Everyone ready? Alex asked, trying to sound more confident than felt. 4 faces turned, showing the same mix of terror and excitement that churned in Alex's own stomach. As ready as we'll ever be, Wei said with a grin. Let's shake things up a bit tonight, shall we? They could hear applause from the hall as the first performers completed their piece. A stagehand appeared at the door. Lee Ensemble, you're up next. The walk to the stage felt endless. Alex could see faces turning in the audience, program notes being consulted. Somewhere in the middle rows sat Alex's grandmother, who had arrived that morning on her first ever plane flight, wearing her church dress and clutching a small bouquet she'd insisted on bringing backstage earlier. As they took their positions on stage, Alex caught sight of Blackwood standing at the back of the hall, arms crossed, face unreadable in the dim light. In the front row, a woman with a National Symphony Orchestra pin on her lapel watched with polite interest, pen poised over a notepad. The stage lights felt hot, the silence of the waiting audience heavy. Alex lifted the violin, met Ryu's eyes at the piano, and nodded once. The piece began softly, almost tentatively, a deliberate choice that mirrored the uncertainty of those first notes in the audition room. But unlike that day, the notes now grew with confidence, with purpose, with the strength of proper training supporting the raw emotion that had always been there. The melody passed from violin to clarinet, to cello and back again, each instrument adding new colors to the story. When they reached the first improvisational section, Alex locked eyes with Wei and something electric passed between them, a musical conversation that hadn't existed in quite this way during rehearsals. She followed Alex's lead, then took the melody in a surprising new direction that made several audience members lean forward in their seats. The music built and swelled, reaching the technically demanding middle section that had taken weeks of practice to master. Alex's fingers flew across the strings, no longer thinking about the notes but feeling them, living them. The hours of scales and exercises with Professor Winters, the late nights in practice rooms, the theory sessions that had once seemed so foreign, all of it came together in this moment. When they reached the final movement, something unexpected happened. Alex glanced at Ryu, who nodded almost imperceptibly and took the piano part in a slightly different direction than they'd rehearsed. Not wrong, just more, responding to the energy in the room, to the way the audience was breathing with the music. The rest of the ensemble followed, finding their way through the framework they'd built together, but making it new in this moment. As they approached the final notes, Alex felt a strange sense of calm replace the earlier anxiety. Whatever happened next, whether the symphony accepted the piece, whether critics praised or panned it, whether this night was the beginning of something larger or simply a beautiful moment in time, the music had found its voice. And so had Alex. The final note hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Then silence, a brief, perfect silence. The applause began slowly, then built until it filled the hall. People were standing, first a few, then entire rows. Alex saw Blackwood still at the back, not applauding, but nodding once with what might have been approval or even pride. The ensemble took their bows. Then Alex stepped forward for a solo bow as composer. The applause intensified. In the front row, the symphony representative was writing rapidly in her notepad. Backstage, after the thunderous reception had finally died down and the second half of the showcase had begun, the 5 musicians huddled together in a mixture of relief, disbelief, and leftover adrenaline. That was something else, Theo said, carefully putting away his clarinet. When we hit that second improv section, I felt like we were reading each other's minds. We were, Wei said, her eyes bright with excitement. That's what happens when it really works. Ryu bumped Alex's shoulder gently. So, how does it feel to be a proper composer now? Before Alex could answer, there was a knock at the door. It was Blackwood, accompanied by the symphony representative. Ms. Rivera would like to speak with you, Blackwood said, his tone giving nothing away. The woman stepped forward, hand extended. That was remarkable, especially for a student composition. We'd like to discuss adapting it for full orchestra for our spring New Voices concert. What followed was a blur of details, talks of orchestration, of rights, of schedules and rehearsals. Through it all, Alex kept glancing at Blackwood, whose expression remained neutral but whose eyes held a quiet satisfaction. Later that night, after the crowds had dispersed and the performance hall had fallen silent, Alex returned alone, drawn to the now empty stage. The space felt different without the audience, without the pressure, without the spotlights. Just a room where something special had happened. Taking out the violin one more time, Alex played the opening notes of Breaking Through, letting them float up to the darkened ceiling. The piece would continue to evolve, for the symphony, for whatever came next. But this version, tonight's version, would always be the one that marked the dividing line between before and after. A sound from the back of the hall made Alex pause. Blackwood stood in the doorway, coat draped over his arm, clearly on his way out. "You should be celebrating with your friends," he said, walking down the center aisle. "Just wanted to remember how it felt," Alex replied. "Before it changes again." Blackwood nodded in understanding. "The piece will grow. So will you." He gestured to the now silent hall. "But yes, remember this moment. This is the one you'll tell people about someday. Tell people when they ask where it all began." Blackwood turned to leave, then paused. "You know, I've been teaching for 30 years. I've said some version of You Call That Playing to hundreds of students. And how many played you their own compositions in response?" Alex asked with a small smile. "Just one." Blackwood's normally stern face softened into something like affection. "Just one.